And welcome everyone. Great to be here again on another Faith in Business. Hope and pray everyone is doing well. Really excited for today's topic. We're talking about just grace in innovation, and we're talking about grace, justice, forgiveness, and accountability. And I'm really excited for today's conversation. For myself, as many of you may know, may or may not know, I used to run a fashion clergy brand. And so I would say I had the best clients in the world. They're all women in ministry. It was amazing. Had a great time serving them for many, many, many years. And I remember occasions where I may, get a rough email, customer service, an issue that someone's having. Let's call it a scathing email, probably a little bit too far, a little bit unnecessary. And here is where, as I was sharing with Stephen, I would just kill them with kindness, um, and just really pour out grace. I am so sorry. We did not mean, oh, I can't believe that we did. And by the time they come back, they're like, oh, no, 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 sorry, it actually wasn't that bad. And I'm going through something and keep me in your prayers. And so just the power of pouring out grace and forgiveness and love and kindness in those situations, whether you've been wrong or you're the one that's done wrong. So we are going to have a time today. We have two incredible speakers joining us today from multinational companies. Both have theological training. I'll allow them to introduce themselves and they're going to share some stories with us, things for us to learn. And please do throw questions in the comments that I can ask them once they are finished. So we'll give them a few minutes each and I will let them introduce themselves. We'll start with Ken. His name is Kenneth, but is happy for us to call him Ken today. So I'll hand over to Ken. He will fully introduce himself and we'll hear some of his stories. Again, questions in the comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Camille. Great to see everybody. Great to be back with FIB. This is the second year of a wonderful partnership between the Mockler Center and FIB, but Peter and I, of course, go way back. So again, and I know a lot of you from a lot of these different events. Some of you know me. I'm the Mockler Center Professor of Workplace Theology and Business Ethics, and along with my friend and colleague who is here on the call, Sarah is somewhere. I can't see you here, but Sarah, give a wave and say hello. Dr. Sarah Menard, she's the associate director. And so we look at all areas of faith, work, and economics. But before I was a theologian, I was a business executive. And I worked literally all over the world on 6 continents and ran some very, very large businesses and got to see how capitalism works from the inside at a high level. And that's why I wrote a book called Redeeming Capitalism, because it needs redemption. But I learned an awful lot during those years. And I want to share two stories that relate to this issue of grace in innovation. Innovation is all about teamwork, and it's all about creativity. So whenever you have those two forces working at the same time, people sharing their creativity, which is very, very personal to them and sacred to them, and having to work in teams, you're going to have a lot of opportunities for conflict. That's just the way human nature is. I worked for a company called Steelcase. Thomas, you'll know Steelcase in Grand Rapids, the largest manufacturer of office furniture in the world. And I worked for them in the late 80s and early 90s when the world was changing. We went from what we used to call international business to global. And the difference was that instead of big American companies exporting products around the world, international, or having joint ventures with subsidiaries around the world, we actually started to integrate our businesses globally. And in many cases, we bought out the joint venture partners. And that was true with Steelcase. We bought out our European joint venture partner. And I was sent over there to help with the integration process. And what I didn't realize was that I was not trusted by the European people that I worked with. I was seen as a spy. And that was deeply hurtful to me personally, deeply hurtful, because my motives were pure. My intention was to try to make the whole company a better company. And one of the projects that really brought it to a head was we were charged by corporate to create a European office furniture product. And I was on that team. And it was interesting because I learned the hard way that there was no such thing as a European market. There was an Italian market, a French market, a German market, an English market, etc. And all of the complexities of health and safety rules and aesthetics and how you manage electricity and communications, all of these things were unique in each of the markets, and we were trying to design a European product. So, being the typical American at that point, I was trying to push the product development process to get done on time and under budget. And what I found was I was being deeply critical of people who were simply being sensible and trying to defend the uniqueness of their market. And I had interpreted it as obstinance. They weren't team players. They weren't supporting the project. And I ultimately needed to ask them for grace. I needed to ask them for forgiveness because I had made the classic mistake of trying to project on them and their business cultures the American model. A lot of American executives make that mistake. I was no exception. But in the process, we started to do two things that were very important. One, we learned to trust each other. And the other, we learned to be patient with each other. And because I had asked them to forgive me for what I had assumed about them, over time, they actually started to come to me to ask my forgiveness for the fact that they didn't trust me. And the end result was we created the most beautiful, harmonious team and a product that I believe to this day is still the best-selling product in the history of Steelcase Europe. So when you have grace, when you are patient, when you are trustworthy and trusting, God's grace really can make a difference. Similarly, a number of years later, when I was the CEO of a British company that was in financial trouble, I needed to insist that we create a new series of green products, ecologically friendly products. This was in a different sector. It was in cleaning chemicals. And I had to really enforce that decision across the organization. But because of what I had learned at Steelcase, I did it in a way that didn't feel like it was being enforced. I did it in a way that was really, truly communal and egalitarian and respectful. And again, we ended up creating a product that became by far the fastest growing product in the company's, probably in the company's history. And so again, it all came down to building trust and having patience. And I just want to share, since I'm a theologian, I want to share a verse from the scripture that really helps me here. And that's Colossians 3:12. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. I think that is a phenomenally powerful passage and really good business advice for Christians working in innovation projects. Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Kevin, who is the innovation guy par excellence.
Absolutely not. Thank you so much, Ken. Two really inspiring stories, and love that Bible quote. I think I should be using that one more often. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here for a little bit of time with you today. I'm Kevin Powell. I have spent many years in innovation, more than I care to count. I started in the world of deep tech, so I was doing machine vision for missile guidance system and high temperature ceramics for jet engines, and then realized I rather wanted to work with people and human beings and solving people issues. So I spent 30 odd years in consumer centric innovation, working for companies and brands that I'm sure you'll have heard of. So Gillette, Procter and Gamble, and Mondelez. Perhaps the last one, you don't know Mondelez, but if I say words like Oreo and Cadbury and Milka and Lou, perhaps that many of you will have eaten some of those products. It was a wonderful journey. But I felt, when I got to being a senior vice president in Mondelez, responsible for 2/3 of the company's innovation portfolio, about $16 billion, and about 800 people around the planet working within my team, I thought, gosh, there needs to be a little more to this. It's time to be giving back a little more. And that's where I made the decision to take a couple of years out and go and get my license to be a reader here in the UK. And now looking at actually overlapping those magisteria of faith and business, as you are all doing so wonderfully. And that's what puts me here today. It's part of that journey. So my reflection is perhaps looking at grace from a different point of view to Ken's. And I would suggest to you, my hypothesis is perhaps that grace is the courage to accept imperfection and improve. Grace is an optimism in learning from failure. Grace is fearlessly striving to improve based on learning. And I would suggest that grace is seeking perfection whilst still accepting that clearly we are not perfect. So I think grace is the very lifeblood of a culture of really sustaining, winning innovation. It's a permission to fail. It's a permission to celebrate learning. And it's about measuring constant improvements towards a goal. So let me celebrate this with, I think, what was a fairly formative learning experience for me fairly early in my career. I'd just been made director of the upstream innovation for the global Gillette company. So all the new razors really started within my team. Had a laboratory in the UK of about 120 very experienced, very capable people. But after several decades of success with razors like Sensor and Mach 3 that just made the company billions of dollars, the lab unfortunately hiccuped. It was unable to deliver the next major innovation, and management became desperate. They really needed this next one, and they poured everything after it, and they created unwittingly a culture of fear. Failure was certainly not tolerated, and there was literally no time to learn. So all bets were kind of placed on the metaphorical roulette wheel, and that number didn't come up. And worse yet, in focusing on this one innovation, they'd drained the entire portfolio of innovation. So as old Mother Hubbard would say, the cupboard was bare, and I'm afraid the dog had no innovation to come. So the future looked bleak, and Gillette, as an American company, was starting to think, do we really need this UK laboratory anymore? So with the leadership team, I sat down and we said, gosh, we really need to change the way we go at this. We need a transformational culture change. And I think, although it wasn't based on this, Ken brilliantly summed it up the other day when we were talking about this. He connected it to the parable of the talents. And he basically said, God expects us to use the considerable talents he's given us. He expects us to take risks, and he expects us to learn. And I love that, because that really underpins the journey we went on. We realized we needed a culture that centered on taking risks and learning. So let's start with ideation. Obviously, that sort of funny process of where we come up with ideas. You can't have people create and share ideas when you're in a culture of fear and those ideas being shot down. So we created a culture of grace where people had an environment that supported and sharing their nascent, sort of somewhat fragile ideas, whilst at the same time lovingly closing down those ideas that clearly were not going to play through. But we did this, and actually it was amazing. Once you created that sort of, I think grace is like being wrapped in a loving blanket, in a loving embrace. Once you created that, the ideation pipeline was full in no time. The problem then quickly became, how do I prototype and test those ideas with people, with consumers? At the end of the day, although I'm a bit, unshaven, people had to shave those ideas. Well, the problem quickly became, we realized we were about to prototype and test 2 ideas every year. And there's a reason for that, is because in razors, if you're wrong by a few atoms in how you do things, you get very bad results. So this is more precise than NASA or Intel. So it's a very complex problem. So basically what we did is we said, let's create this really big goal. We knew we'd never get to it. That didn't matter. What we needed to do was to improve. We were always going to be imperfect, but we needed to become more towards our goal. So we said, what if instead of basically once every 6 months we go through a learning cycle. What if we could do this once every 24 hours? Really crazy goal. Everyone thought we were mad, but we brought everyone with us and we rewired the laboratory. So we literally brought consumers in the morning. We did science on them as such. We designed, around the ideas, created CAD models over the afternoon, and then overnight we were able to use rapid prototyping. This is 20 plus years ago, so it's pretty good cutting edge stuff to actually make those ideas and then test them the following morning. So you could have this 24-hour cycle. So we went to a culture of failing early, failing fast, failing often, and learning. And we celebrated not just the wins, we celebrated the losses. If you've ever watched the YouTube video by the conductor Benjamin Zander, when something goes wrong, he invites us to go, oh, fascinating. And I think we did that. But we didn't just let people off the hook. We held people accountable for their jobs. They were accountable for learning and they were accountable for improvement and moving towards the goals. So yeah, sometimes we got to the 24 hours, but not always, and that didn't matter. We got better and better, and frankly, we were able to go through a cycle every month instead of once every 6 months. And that meant that within the first 3 years, we were able to actually deliver 3 blockbuster prototypes, where in the past 5 years, the lab had stalled. So grace enabled us to celebrate imperfection and to improve. It gave us permission to fail, to celebrate learning, and to measure constant improvements towards this shared goal. Now, there's no doubt we created, literally billions of dollars of incremental net revenue. I don't say that show off. It's just an objective thing we did. But you know what? I don't think that actually matters. What really matters is that we were able through grace to enable talented people to thrive, to learn, and to win together. And I think that's the thing I would say I was most proud of. So just one simple example. I'd like to say it started with very clear theological grounding. It didn't. But I would like to say the values I learned as a Christian at some degree played a part in that. So, Camille, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. That was amazing. Do keep an eye on the chat. There's been some really good questions and comments and everything in there. So I just want to throw some questions to you both. Ken, I'll start with you. I really like the quote actually that Rob put in the chat earlier. He said that we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And what I wanted to ask you, Ken, is what did that look like in terms of the change inside of you as a leader? What kind of changed inside of you, and what did you have to work on personally with all the change that was going on?
Yeah. By the way, before I answer that, Kevin, it just so happens the Mockler Center is named after Coleman Mockler, the former chairman and CEO of Gillette Corporation, who was a devout Christian. Um, the I think the change for me was um, I had to try to see other people, as the scripture tells us, through the eyes of Christ. You know, these are image bearers. The fact that we had differences culturally, the fact that we had different experiences, the fact that, maybe some people even had different agendas, etc. The fact of the matter is, we're all, as Kevin rightly said, very flawed human beings. And so we have to go in with that kind of humility, and also that kind of wonder that, these people are created in the image of God and have tremendous, potential, etc. But we have to understand that there are the things we don't see. And I think, I don't know if Rob was getting to this as much as we project onto people what we want to see, right? And the fact of the matter is, everybody is hiding things. They're hiding the pain in their life. They're hiding the hurts in their life. They're hiding their own insecurities. They're hiding the problems that they've got. And those things are part of what it means to be human. And we've got to cut people slack. I mean, that's what grace is all about. That's what forgiveness is all about. We've got to cut people slack and understand that, they're as confused and as doubtful and as anxious as we are. So I think it's really important to constantly remind ourselves that the the image that we project and the image that others project may not be 100% reality. In fact, it almost never is 100% reality. One other thing I'll say also about trust and this concept of the other. Um, uh, Stephen Covey Jr., the son, recently wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. And in he has a wonderful quote. He says, "We judge ourselves by our intentions, but we judge others by their actions."
Mm.
And that's unfair. That's unfair, right? Because Jesus doesn't judge us by either of those standards. He judges us by the cross, which is ultimate grace, ultimate forgiveness. So I think that's an important thing to remember. Thank you for the question. Great question.
Beautiful. Ultimate grace. Love that. And Kevin, you talk so much about permission to fail, and I love the idea of that grace being a warm blanket. It's safety, it's protection. I'm safe here. But what does it look like when people fail, and even keeping the blanket on, keeping people safe?
Absolutely, and I think it's a great question because actually it also doesn't. It asks us the question, is all failure equal? I think as well. So I think failure is in the spirit of if you learn. So if something goes wrong, you make a mistake or something unexpected happen, which let's face it, that's what innovation is usually. There's something unexpected, otherwise it's not innovation. Then I think, success from that point is learning from that mistake, that failure, that unexpected learning. So I think, and that's what God invites us to do, is that we are flawed, but he wants us to get better, to each day get that bit better, to learn from our mistakes and get better. There is what I call abject failure, which doesn't deserve a nice warm blanket. In fact, it requires a cold bath of water. And that is one where we don't learn from it, where people just basically keep making the same mistake time and time again and never learn from it. And, those are the ones, it's very well me saying, make lots of mistakes, but do it early. If you're making prototypes that cost, I don't know, $1 each and you make 100 of them and it goes wrong, you've lost $100. If you're making fusion and that you've just spent $1 billion of capital and you really should have learned a lot earlier on that you needed 6 blades, not 5. I make that a bit of a jest, but it's not a million miles off. Then frankly, you've just wasted $1 billion that you could have learned over. That's abject failure. So I think it really is about learning, reflecting on ourselves. And I think that's what prayer is about. Honestly, I look at the end of the day and I lie there in bed and I have my exam and I just think, gosh, where was God in my day? And where all the times I didn't listen to him and I didn't get it right? And then I think, what am I going to do differently tomorrow? What did I learn so I don't do that again? What I want to do is fail forward and learn and grow. I don't want to just be an abject failure. Now, sometimes I am. So let me be very honest. I'm like, God, here I am again. I've done exactly the same thing I haven't learned. I like to think that's because I'm human. But nonetheless, that warm blanket always comes from God. Even in abject failure, I feel he says, you know what? You are forgiven. Start again another day. But let's try a little harder next time, maybe, Kevin.
No, I love that. That's great. And even the Bible speaks about measures of grace, And so it's as Marjorie said, when you're cutting people slack, but when is it too much slack? And so again, it's what does that look like on an everyday basis and when you really need to pull those strings in. So I just before we wrap up and head to our break rooms, I just wondered if there's anything additional that maybe you didn't get to say that you want to share that's come up as you've heard each other speak. Anything else on grace, just in general, grace, forgiveness, and accountability? I'll go to you first, Ken.
Yeah, I would say in response to Marjorie's question, which is a great question, at the end of the day, it comes down to discernment. But my general feeling is, um, if someone on our team fails, we have also failed. And so we have to take shared responsibility for that. And we have a duty of care to try to get people to be better at what they do. And I think there is a point sometimes at which you just have to say this is a bad fit and it's not going to work, and it's better for them if they move on, whatever. But more times than not, I think if we take that extra effort to forgive one more time and to try one more time, we will usually get a better result. And if I may just share a very, very quick example of that. When I took over to run a business again for a big multi-billion-dollar company, my boss said, "Your number two guy has really messed up a lot, and you have my permission to fire him." And what I found was he was just in the wrong job. He was a brilliant guy, but they had kept him in the wrong job for so long that, of course, he was failing. So we found the right job, and he ended up becoming one of the most valuable employees in our business.
Brilliant. I love what Mike has said in the comments about the former chairman of IBM, where an employee did a mistake that cost the company $600,000, and they were ready to sack him, and they said, "No, we just spent $600,000 trusting him. You know, we want to keep someone with that experience." So again, it's that measure of grace and discernment as well, and what to do and where to place people. Over to you, Kevin. Final thoughts.
Yes, it was one of the comments. Maybe it was Marjorie's. I don't recall. I haven't got it in front of me. But was I talking about a culture of grace? And I think the point is yes. I think innovation is founded on a culture of grace. And as someone has quoted, maybe there's a book, I don't recall it. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that's very true. I think we agonize over strategy. And as a consumer products person, I will tell you now that execution is the only strategy that a consumer ever sees. So, for all the messing around with strategy, it matters about getting it right with your consumers and getting it right with people. And the only way you're going to do that is by having a culture of grace. And of course, culture, for whatever model you use, I like the organizational performance model. People like to think culture is, well, what does my org chart look like? Well, yes, I do think that plays a role in that. But I think the question is, how do we make decisions? How do we learn together? How do we prioritize? How do we talk to each other? What are the kind of people that we hire? How do we promote people? How do we grow people? That's what culture is about. It's about shared values. And I have to say, one thing I've always had is I'd like to look at what each of us, our values are. For me, mine actually neatly spell the word pilot. So I have a passion for winning and a passion for God. I is integrity. L is leadership. O is ownership, and T is trust. I look personally for all five of those. If I don't see that in a company, I don't work for them. If I don't see that in others, I tend not to get on too well with them. And I think grace is about realizing that, because you know what? Those came from God. So I think that's what perhaps, Marjorie, to your question, that's what a culture of grace looks like.